I'm fascinated by the lights. So.
No one knows what they mean.
20 years.
They just go off every once in a while.
If we admitted it honestly, we don't want to.
All right, welcome everybody. My name is Nate Jones. I'm the Freedom of Information Act Director at the Washington Post, and I'm going to be moderating our event today, the bipartisan Transparency Caucus event on transparency in the executive branch, and maybe what the legislative branch can do to nudge that along, you know what I mean. I would like to thank very much Representatives Quigley and Representatives Walberg for hosting this event. And being allies and champions of open government in Congress and what I call the crown jewel of open government, the Freedom of Information Act. So I thank you guys very much for bringing attention to this open government partnership and getting people together to work on something that I think almost everyone agrees on is very important. So thank you very much. And without further ado, unless you'd like to say something, we can get started. Please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
First, thank you all for being here. Thanks to Cody from my staff and putting all this together. My friend Mr. Walberg, who's joined us on this. I formed the Transparency Caucus when I got to Congress because I'm from Chicago. And two of the last four people who sat in my seat went to jail. Two of the last four governors in Illinois went to jail, and I was tired of the jokes on the House floor. What did one Illinois prisoner say to the other Illinois prisoner? The food was better here when you were governor. And that was from a guy from Jersey. So, just to show you how dramatic this is and how important transparency is to how governments function, you know, to me it's really about preserving the public's trust. I was in Ukraine a little over a week ago. Obviously some striking moments, some horrible times taking place. One of the things that struck me was we met with their inspector general, we met with their prosecutor, we met with the organization that seeks out corruption. They mentioned in the polling in Ukraine right now, what is the most important issue, the most important national security threat? The results in the polling was corruption. So as we go forward and recognize this, this isn't feigned efforts or a lost cause. We've had some victories here, Data Act, congressionally mandated reports, among others. We've got other places to go and things to do on this. Clearly, the executive branch has to be part of this, but so does the judicial branch. We've started to work on expanding cameras in the courtroom. I reminded our Supreme Court justices that while they may not want cameras in their court for reasons that defy rational explanation, every single thing we say on the House floor, warts and all, is shot out there live, as it should be. And really, given the importance of the decisions they make, there shouldn't be an exception there, right? They say it doesn't make us look good. I'm reminded, Mr. Smith goes to Washington. The Senate screened that in 1939. They said, we don't want this, it doesn't make us look good. At the exact same time, that movie was screened in Moscow, in Berlin, and they refused to put it out because they said it made us look too good. Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, but that beholding has to come through a clear lens, and that's about transparency. So thanks for being here in this effort. Thank you. And my friend, Mr. Walker, before we go vote.
Before we go vote, and in transparency also, I get a chance to take my three little granddaughters on the floor with me today. And I don't want to miss that. Well, as Congressman Quigley said, we share a desire for transparency, and glad that you're here today, and glad for the panel to discuss. And I wish in many ways I could stay around and listen to that discussion. I was raised in the south side of Chicago, for all transparency. And so I know what transparency isn't and what it is. And we all wrestle with that. I know what transparency is in just recent days when my words were taken out of context, put out accurately in what was said, but edited for the rest of the content. That was ugly for a while. And the swatting incident yesterday, vandalization of my office, district office, et cetera, et cetera. But during this course of time, as a member of Congress, whatever we say is transparent. So it gave me a chance then to become more transparent and say, no, not complete, not exact. Let me explain, and also share the full transcript, the full video of what was said. And so in transparency, it became a benefit to me as well to get the truth out. Here in Congress, we run into those situations often, and that's why I work to get the Taxpayers' Right to Know Act signed into law, as we eventually did. For example, the government has almost 2,400 federal financial assistance programs. In a fiscal year 2022, allocated more than $4.47 trillion in obligations. That's a lot of money the American people deserve. I share that as simply one example, where transparency gives a chance for us to see what actually goes on. And I appreciate the federal or the executive branch moving, and here in my hands I hold the Open Government Partnership, 4th Open Government National Action Plan for the United States of America back in the Trump administration, the present administration, 5th U.S. Open Government National Action Plan. It's all well and good for them to have it. We applaud that. But this isn't law. It gives us an opportunity as legislators in the branch that represents the people to say yay or nay. And how we deal with that in a global framework as well is important. So the discussions today will lead us into those thoughts. Like I said, I wish I could be here, but the chance to take my grandkids onto the floor outweighs it. And oh, by the way, we got a vote too. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Wish you all the best in the discussion.
All right, thank you very much, Representatives. So we're going to start this off by having Daniel York speak for a bit about his position as Director of Open Government of the Open Government Secretariat at the U.S. GSA, Government Services Administration. And then we're going to open it up to the panel to discuss about the Open Government Partnership, a little bit open government in general, and some Freedom of Information Act, because I can't help myself. And then we will save some time for questions at the end. So please, Daniel.
Great. Thank you. Thank you to the members for having us here today. Thank you for allowing me to come in and talk a little bit about what we do. So my name again, Daniel York. I'm the Director of the Open Government Secretariat within the GSA Office of Government-Wide Policy. GSA is one of the 4 executive branch pieces that help to organize open government within the United States. The White House, the Office of Science, Technology, Policy, helps with some of the higher political, helping things move around, the overall policy stuff. Department of State and USAID help handle all the international facing requirements of the participation in the Open Government Partnership. And then GSA is responsible for the domestic related commitments, the National Action Plan, reporting progress, et cetera, multi-stakeholder forum. With some money in the FY23 budget, we were given some funding to stand up the Secretariat. That was after NAT 5 came out, partway through trying to implement. It sort of fell into our laps, and now we're doing the best we can with it all. Really happy to be here, talk about what we do and how we do it. Looking forward to the public participation. I do like to say, and folks have probably heard me say it before, that we can't be a more transparent, participatory government if we don't ask the people what they want, right? We need the participatory piece in order to continue to grow and mature. So thank you again, and pass it to the member to the right.
Sure. I should have introduced everyone probably. But I'd like to introduce Patrice McDermott, who's the Director of Government Information Watch, focused on open and accountable government, so a member of the public. And I'd like to introduce Christian Honer, Policy Director for the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability on behalf of Chairman James Comer, so a representative from legislative branch here. So before we start, I was walking here today, and I remember that I was in a room with Patrice and Cass Sunstein, who's a big open government guy in the Obama administration, and I think, Samantha Power about 12 years ago,
Yeah.
talking about National Action Plan 1.
Right.
So Patrice, would you start us off by talking a little bit about the history, how did we get from Plan 1 to 5, and even a little bit more of what is the Open Government Partnership? I think we know it, but the
Right.
name is, what is it?
Well, it's an initiative that actually rose out of an effort by other governments to set standards and mile markers for themselves to make their countries more open and more accountable. And it's been a very, as Alex in the audience knows, it's been a very mixed bag. In my opinion, I mean, you probably know better than I do, Alex, how many countries are doing this now, but
Over
it's
70.
over 70, yeah. It wasn't that many to start with, but it has continued to grow and to have an impact in many countries around the world, much more than I think it has here. President Obama, because he was a president committed to openness, was the one who initiated the idea of having a national action plan, an open government plan in the U.S. And he put out, as I recall, there was an invitation that went out, and here's a key difference in some of the following ones, went out from the White House to civil society. I don't remember quite the paths that it went, that's a long time ago, but I ran openthegovernment.org at that point, and we started to bring people together to brainstorm and to build ideas, and there was enormous enthusiasm. People had so many ideas. We had documents that were probably 30 pages long with people's suggestions. After many, many discussions, we honed them down into probably 15 or 20 plus commitments, and then we began working with the government to implement them. One of the big differences, especially in the first National Action Plan, was that although OIRA, Cass Sunstein, sort of kicked it off and pushed us back. I sent you the minutes. And there was an effort going on in the State Department on the international side of it. It was really the community, the civil society community, that took the reins and ran with it. And so we had, the huge difference though was that in trying to operationalize the things that we were asking for, we met directly with agency personnel. And we've talked about this. It made all the difference in the world. And one of the people that was in on that from the National Archives told me recently that she was so thrilled because this is how she had never thought government could be like this. And this was how she thought it should be. Government and people working together. So that was one of the very big differences. Some of the meetings were fruitful, some of them weren't. Some of them were fruitful initially, and then became like with the Department of Justice on FOIA and a number of other things. But it was It was a very ambitious plan. What came out of the White House was less ambitious, but still was focused on openness. What came out in the second plan, which we were less involved in because we were somewhat disappointed in the first National Action Plan, how it evolved and what it resulted in. The second National Action Plan was less focused on openness and accountability and was more focused on, I would say, what we would call now performance. Performance in policing and performance, I'm trying to think of some of the things that were in it. Data, I think, and that sort of thing. But it really wasn't about making the government open to the public. It wasn't about making what government does transparent to the public. It wasn't about engaging with the public to move government forward in mutually defined ways. I mean, government always thinks it's moving forward. But so that's been an overview.
Thanks, Teresa. Yeah, I remember I was at one of the meetings and I said, but you forgot about the Freedom of Information Act. But to the government's credit, it did add a provision that eventually became the FOIA Advisory
Right.
Council that many people
Right.
here sat on in a
Well,
good
I
thing.
think Cass's
So that-
response to you was, it's always about the Freedom of Information Act.
Well,
Yeah.
but that demonstrates the pull of
Right.
civil society
Right.
and those within the administration.
Right.
And Christian, what about Congress? What is Congress's role or potential role with open government partnership?
Yeah, I think we recognize this as an executive branch initiative. I mean, it's not mandated statutorily or explicitly like authorized. I mean, I say explicitly because it is authorized. We would hope that the executive branch tries to involve stakeholder input as it implements and continues to refine its programs. But, you know, in the lead up to this panel, we've been having a lot of internal conversations about this and kind of reading through materials with Mr. Walberg's team as well. But I think what lacks from our perspective is maybe a better scoping about expectations of what is achievable and kind of what might be appropriate initiatives for civil society to be expecting to come out of this process. So I think anytime you can manage expectations is probably best for all parties. And so if there was kind of like two prongs to, I would say, like how to think about appropriate expectations or commitments, they would be this. And I'd also say, like, if this already exists somewhere, like with the Open Government Partnership or any like authoritative documents the U.S. government's produced, I didn't see them. A lot of it was focused on the engagement process, which I think is good. But I also know that or recognize that this is kind of left up to each participating government. That's how they want to do that. But I think for our benefit as U.S. government, that would be a healthy exercise and maybe kind of an output of today's conversation. But from my perspective, and again, I work for Chairman Comer, but I'm speaking on behalf of more of a staff level kind of opinion. But you know, focusing on open government initiatives of the executive branch that are purely pertaining to internal affairs of the executive branch agencies and operations of the administrative state, and are stemming from already authorized or legal authorities and those activities that spring from it, but with the explicit call to action for civil society to help shape expectations and also to provide input on what would be useful. I've heard a lot of like community, or read a lot of community critique that there were some aspects of the latest plan just kind of advertising existing activities and what would be described as like non-germane actions, if you will. But yeah, I think there's some credence to that. Those concerns are valid. And I would say like kind of maybe that would lead us into a discussion on like what would be inappropriate expectations or commitments. And I'd say like things that are politically controversial to the point where you can't in good faith say that that was a consensus ask on behalf of the participating groups. It would be a concern that I've spoken to some advocacy groups that didn't feel like participating would be a fruitful exercise, so they declined to. That would be a problem for the government to recognize. And if you're not getting a broad, ideologically broad set of actors to weigh in, then the outputs are going to be inherently skewed anyways. But And also like reforms or activities in the plan that I would say lack a clear nexus with the goal of focusing on transparency in government. There were some things I was reading, again, this is an opinion of mine at the staff level, but there's probably some things that more belong in an executive action, executive order, maybe the president's management agenda or his agency strategic planning, because they're more tied to the political goals of the current administration, and less maybe something that is that consensus external expectation. Didn't really lack that transparency component that I think is at the heart of all of this. And obviously reforms that would require an act of Congress to explicitly authorize the executive branch to do. Got to say that as the legislative branch panelist. But I don't see a problem with the National Action Plan celebrating full, sound, strong implementation of laws on the books, transparency laws, because I think in Congress, as I've worked here for nearly 5 years, but also was in the private sector for 10 years advocating for such reforms before, like when you design what I would say are like model transparency laws and work on model legislation, and I can get into some of that later. I've got a whole list if you want it. Like we're expecting there to be that dialogue in the implementation phase, because like healthy transparency laws are the implementation is listening to the user base of the information that's going to produce, and is providing that information in an accessible and usable format. And if you don't have that dialogue, I don't think it's achievable to declare successful implementations. And it's our expectation in Congress that that dialogue takes place. So I guess I can pause there. And
Sure.
take it back.
You raise good points, and we'll try and circle back to them. But now let's take a look in the weeds a little bit about National Action Plan 5 that the representative waved around. That's being worked on right now throughout government. And I'd like to kind of ask the panel going down the line, what are some, I think there are, correct me, thank you,
36 commitments.
36.
Oh.
36 initiatives in here. So I want to maybe ask everyone to name one or maybe two that you think is a game changer or your favorite, but let's just highlight some of the initiatives that the government is working on implementing to.
Having looked at it yet.
Okay, well,
You'll go last if you want.
Okay, thank you.
No, happy to go first. Yeah, so
Please.
there are 5 themes, 36 commitments,
Wow.
70 sub-commitments. We broke them down in sub-commitments because some of the commitments were large, often more than one agency helping to accomplish them. GSA's role is mostly trying to coordinate across, right? A large one-of-government approach to help agencies with each other, but also reporting up to a single channel. So we ourselves, although we're responsible for a couple of the commitments, don't actively do the day-to-day work on the vast majority of them. But back to your actual question. So my favorites are the ones actually dealing with the public participation and community engagement RFI. So it'd be like 13.2 and 122. Yeah, it's in there, I promise.
Oh,
But so there's a RFI out right now from the White House.
and RFI is
I'm
for
sorry,
audience.
request for information, where the White House is requesting information from the public on how the government can better expand, include participation from the public and community engagement. I don't quite know what the outcome of their initial, what it's going to be when it all comes in, but the fact that we're even going out to the public and asking the public again, how can we do better as the executive branch? How can we bring people into the fold? How can we bring citizens' opinions into what we do? Is really, really great, right? It's a good thing. And so that's why the 113.2 and 122 are my favorite, because they actively try to increase the transparency that we're here to abide.
Thanks. Christian, any thoughts on things that you especially like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to stick to areas that are mentioning and building off of laws we've worked on in Congress, bipartisan laws, but I thought the streamlined researcher access to confidential federal data for evidence building was nifty. It mentions the Foundation for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act and kind of diving, I would say, into like a domain-specific area of information and trying to make that more open for federal researchers, federally focused researchers. So I think anytime you can bridge communities, my question, and this would be a blanket question through all these that I'm mentioning, is what's going to be new under the activities of the National Action Plan? Like, what are you doing differently through the stakeholder involvement, to build upon the work we're already required to do under the law. Also invest in core federal management functions for payment integrity. This is, I'd say payment integrity issues, top 3 issue for our members on the committee. And we have existing laws on the books, and I think they're broad enough and provide the necessary authorities for the federal government to chase down improper payments. I think it's just often a willpower issue of how much you're going to educate and follow through with the necessary controls at the program level. And it's such a broad problem. The numbers are so massive, and I think it really does require a really strong external engagement so that everyone's on board and understands the expectations. Also manage federal funding with accountability, transparency, and stewardship. Building off of the Taxpayers' Right to Know Act, which is a great bipartisan piece of legislation here. Mr. Walberg championed in the House. The federal program inventory as required under there is coming to fruition. The law required pilot phase, so there could be the public input process, but now OMB is rolling out something more robust, and that law really tries to tie it into the financial background of government. It's using the building blocks of the budget process and how we classify federal spending to form the organizational picture of federal programs across the federal agencies. And I think that's got to take all eyes on what's being produced, because all stakeholders need to go in there and look like, is that how I view a program? Is that capturing everything? What's missing? And let the agency know, let OMB know, let Congress know if there's something being missed there. Because I do think credit where credit's due. OMB is doing this as best they can, but to their point, to me, in our committee, if no one looks at it, no one uses it, it's just not going to succeed. So I would encourage the National Action Plan to really take that to focus. You have a lot of eyes on your work here. You can drive that into federal program inventory and help that achieve success. Also, the Congressional Budget Justification and Transparency Act, that's trickling out. USAspending.gov, you can now find a lot of these. And looking at a key stakeholder here in the audience that hacked that together before it became law. But I think we can imagine what the next step of a law like that is. You can now find them, but are they really truly accessible for Congress, but also those that want to read that material? It could be machine readable. We could go there.
Right.
That could cost a lot, or we can have those conversations in Congress, but we maybe look to this process to see what the art of the possible or what people want to see there. So those would be ones I would focus in on. There were others that were intriguing, but we want to learn more.
Sure, it's actually very impressive. I think the one that I see of greatest interest is the increased civic space to engage the public, and particularly the improving public engagement related to agency regulations. I work in coalition with a lot of different organizations. So I work I'm part of the coalition on scientific integrity. And there's a lot of effort. Well, I mean, the Federal Register is there, and that's part of it. But there's also committees that the government, especially in the area of science and medicine, and that are very difficult for the outside to have any participation in. They have whether it's a federal advisory committee or in the medical area, it's, I don't know the terminology, but it's a group of advisors, and they really are not interested in bringing other people in. They're not interested in listening to anyone else. And some of the things, most of the things that government does have, if not a direct impact on the public, they have a secondary or tertiary impact on the public. And part of the problem is that it takes a while for the experts, civil society experts, to figure out what's going on and then to formulate information to get out to the public, or even just to their circle of people, to generate comments. A number of years ago, I was getting sign-ons for a letter on something that NARA was doing, and it was going to close down.
National Archives.
National Archives, thank you, and Records Administration, was going to, at the request of the Department of Interior, do away with a whole set of records. And we didn't learn about it, partly our own fault, but until it was almost done and dusted. And then to get the information and to get enough information and to formulate it so that people could understand, and then to circulate it out through contacts and contacts of contacts. And in the end, we got about 100 groups signed on to a letter opposing it, and it was stopped. But that was last minute, and that was partly our fault. But it's a very slow process to engage the public. You get really committed industry people who are directly impacted by it, who are monetarily impacted by it. And then there's the rest of the world, the rest of the American public, who are probably very much affected by regulations, but have a hard time following them. Federal Register has gotten better in the last few years. It's easier to find things, but it's still not easy to use or to keep track. This, I think, is really incredibly important, and I think that this is something that people outside Washington, that people, out in the States and in civil society would be very interested in if it were done in a way that really made engagement, informed engagement possible, not just physically possible, but the ability to get enough information and enough time to really understand what the regulation is going to do and what it says, and then to build a coalition of other people and to submit comments. So I think this is really important, and it's something that I think there are possibilities for outreach to state groups to engage them in this process. But that would be my top one there.
Thanks,
And I'll give you your notes back.
I know, I'm flying blind. Thanks, everyone.
Could I respond to something that
please.
resonated with me when you say, like, the public has a hard time following it? I think that's really a core challenge of any open government reform. It's easy for us to talk about access to congressionally
Right.
mandated reports or budget justifications, but the average voter really doesn't need to know what those are, and we're building very targeted, legislative requirements, reforms to get at, like, key domains of information. And I think it's sometimes hard because for the policymakers to celebrate the value of what we've done, because, it takes a conversation where you have to, like, start back and educate the voter, the citizen, the public participant about, like, how the government actually even functions, and it's a very complex beast. And,
Yeah.
you gotta start there to say, then, here's the value of opening this up. And,
Can I respond?
yeah.
So I think that's the value of, there's layers of engagement,
Mhm.
and I think that's the value, speaking as somebody who's in the Open Government Society, in engaging people who work with who work with the communities that you want to reach, that you see it affecting, that you think should be thinking about it and should understand and should have a say in what you're doing. And we all tend to go back to the groups we know, the lanes that we usually go down. So I think, I don't disagree,
Yeah.
but that's the struggle, to get what the federal government is doing, whether it's executive branch, legislative branch, and right off the board, because they don't really care, I don't think, but, my opinion.
Yeah.
But, to try to build those lanes to identify, avenues or channels to work through to get information out. And I think it really is imperative to try to identify left, right, center, whatever, folks on the ground in the states who have their own networks and their own outreach and can get people engaged. So,
Yeah, I think we're in agreement there. I'm coming at it from the perspective that you spend a lot of political capital that you don't realize you're gonna need, because you're like, oh, this is a kumbaya,
Right.
the government bill, and then you, I would say, get into the Senate process as a House guy. And just, you know, you're trying to get over concerns, deal with random holds and stuff.
Right.
And, so it's like, how do you garner the political capital to then
and
be
then
able
how
to
do you
spend it?
generate the public pressure?
It's to say, it does take a lot of effort, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it has to be a lot of effort for a good outcome,
Right,
and
Right.
it has to be purposeful,
right,
right? So
Right.
you try to utilize a network of networks approach,
Right.
right? It's impossible for me and my staff to be everywhere with all groups all the time. But making targeted and informed choices and trying to reach as many people as possible,
Right.
so that you can inform them
Right.
both of the topics and the solution sets,
right.
and then give you meaningful feedback on the solution sets that best interact with their lives, right? Yeah, it's something we've definitely tried to build over the last 6 months or whatever.
Yeah,
it's
it's hard.
Well, I do want to use that to bring up the issue of engagement. And this report that I'm about to quote from did occur before this fell into Daniel's lap, so I want to make that clear. But the Open Government Partnership was pretty scathing on previously plans, and I think it's fair to say we were even teetering about having a National Action Plan 5. So previous to this, the OGP's report said on the U.S. plan, quote, it had fewer substantial results due to reduced levels of ambition. Quote, the things that they did do were, quote, part of a pre-existing government agenda rather than responses to civil society demand, end quote. And that the point agency changed 3 times throughout one plan. So essentially, when I read that, I read weak tea. So to everyone on the table, what is happening on this plan specifically? You can address all those things, but most importantly, I've heard from civil society folks that they previously, and we heard it a little bit now, and even this conversation, felt excluded. And part of the OGP is they're supposed to be included. So what is happening this time to make sure that it was different than that scathing report, and that the next OGP report about this plan will say we did a much better job? I'll start with Daniel and then go down the line.
All right, let's make sure no one has any tomatoes in the audience. You always gotta start dodging things.
Well, I noted that was before, it was written before your tenure.
It was, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, obviously, we had very little input into what happened before we took over in September 2023. But I can say that we've made a very much a concerted effort from that point forward, having public, on-the-record conversations, briefing out what was happening both within the 5th National Action Plan, as well as our thoughts for the future of the 6th National Action Plan. All of those sessions are recorded, and they're on the GSA YouTube page, or the Open Government playlist. Check them out. They love it when you like it. Like as many videos as you like. So we've made concerted efforts to actually then go out to localities. We were in, where were we, in Atlanta in December, doing a civil society event, and we're planning more events in other localities across the U.S., more information to come as they get shored up. But speaking with people and bringing back that trust, right? So the independent review mechanism, IRM, within the Open Government Partnership, they had fair criticism. And that's criticism that we should take and understand and try to do better in the future. And that starts with getting out there. It starts with doing events like this. It starts by going out and having open on-the-record conversations, talking with people in person, talking with people virtually, never turning down a phone call, because I think all that input together will then help build trust needed to create the next 6th National Action Plan, right? If we were to come out 6 months ago and say we're creating NAP 6, to Christian's point earlier, it would be crickets in civil society, right? We burnt that trust. Folks have opted out, swipe left, as it were. So we want to talk with people now, understand the criticisms we're receiving, and then really build towards that NAP 6, which I can't actually say I don't know what it is yet, because we want to build up a civil society. And if I were to say NAP 6 is going to be A, B, and C, then that defeats the purpose of co-creating it.
I completely agree, and I'll let you guys comment, but I would just say as a former member of civil society, there is nothing that bothers us more than when people do a listening tour, they listen to us and they don't do anything they say, and they said, we listened to them. So I would encourage that not to happen. Do you have comments on public engagement? If not, that's all right.
Yeah, no, just need to, as Daniel says, get out and talk to people outside of DC, talk to people that aren't government people. And that's hard to make those connections and to do. But yeah, I think you're on the right track, but I think diversifying in who you're, when you go out to places, going to the Carter Center was terrific, and I'm sure they brought in a lot of good people. But as you choose other places to go, think about the key areas that you're thinking of having in the plan, and trying to identify what are the groups there that are working on those. So I'm not suggesting that this should be one, but if you were going to have something about migration, you would want to talk to people, groups that on both sides of the, the perspective, what they think would be useful, what they think would be needed. If you're talking about data, again, that's not so much of a partisan divide, I don't think, but some policy areas there are, and you need to talk to both. So I think you need to think ahead where your rough vision is, and start thinking about who can not just amplify, but add amplitude to that, enrich it with experience on the ground and what's needed on the ground. So.
I haven't been engaged in the process for a while, especially not in my current role, so I don't feel it's appropriate to really comment on that. I would just say I made some comments up front about setting expectations, more about what's achievable from the content and commitment side of things, but to the point about making sure that we have ideological balance on both sides, different perspectives. I think it's also incumbent on the participants to look around the room, digitally on whatever forum, and make sure you're bringing your partner organizations along with you. I mean, in Congress, we've seen just some really fun coalitions come together with support letters, and we know that's possible. So to those in the room, see who's not there, and maybe reach out and make sure you're building that consensus on your end as you're seeking these reforms. But also, as the legislative panelists, I have to say, come to the legislative branch if you're not getting something out of the executive branch. We're designed to solicit input. Doors are open. You have friends all over the place, and bring any real issues you have to the oversight committee, and we will listen. We'll be upfront if we can't do it, if we don't have the political capital to achieve something, or it's at odds with our goals. But you do have friends in a listening ear, so I'd say don't ignore the other branch of government as you're seeking reforms. So.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask one or two more, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience for questions. I should mention that Susan Harley of POGO was supposed to be here but couldn't make it. She wishes she was.
Public citizen.
Public citizen. Apologize. I do know the difference. Public citizen. Thank you. Sorry. But in one of her writings, she wrote about her work with the previous National Action Plan, and on the website it said that had there been more, her organization thought, more collaboration with open government, FOIA, what I call the crown jewel of open government, would have had a more prominent role. I guess my question would be, what do we, taking a step back. So the Department of Justice has pledged to do three things on FOIA. Have a business standard, improve FOIA.gov, and issue a new self-assessment toolkit. Two things. I would say if you do all three of those things, That does not mean that FOIA delays will improve. At the DOJ I just checked, and they have 10 FOIA requests older than 10 years at least. It doesn't mean that more information will come out. So I would just, go back to Susan's point saying, if you talk to us, we would say, we don't really care about that stuff as much as we care about delays and over redactions. A. B. Department of Justice isn't GSA. How does GSA make sure, or dare I say the word, enforce that agencies, including this DOJ specifically, but everywhere, are you the open government policeman? Are you the beat cop? Are you knocking on doors? How does GSA make sure that of all these 36 commitments from a dozen plus government agencies, the agencies actually follow through? I know it's tough, but any insight you can give us would be helpful.
Yeah, no, luckily I didn't leave my baton at the security desk. No, GSA doesn't have any enforcement capability, right? That's mostly at the White House political level. So a lot of what we do is understanding where agencies are with their process, helping get them the resources that either political or information resources help them achieve their goals, and then track the progress that they report out and make that publicly available this way. So I can't speak to the FOIA one specifically. I do know that they publish their FOIA Business Standards RFI. That closes on May 17th, I'm sorry. For those that want to comment on the FOIA Business Standards, it's out there in the Federal Register. They can do that. And they're making progress towards those. What went into NAP5 to create that, I wasn't there, I can't say specifically, but I do know that in our conversations with the civil society, that is a topic that comes up quite a bit, and we want to hear that and take that in and work with them to co-create the next national action plan.
Yeah, please. So I'd love for you guys to comment on that, and then everyone give, just so we can have audience questions, give comment and do anything you'd like to say in closing on one round.
Okay.
And then we'll open it up. So Patrice,
I would
please.
just add that one of the things that we learned initially, and has been obvious since, is that you have to have White House involvement. You really do, because agencies will listen to the White House. No offense, but they're not going to listen to GSA. I mean, you don't have that sort of Damocles sword hanging over them to the extent that the White House does. But that made, I think, so much difference, even between the first and second National Action Plan. The White House was less engaged with the second. So those are my...
No, that's an important point. Thank you. Anything you'd like to add or close on?
I would just say, like, we don't have anything on the committee that I'm here to, like, advocate for any positions right now other than we're in listening mode. I would say, like, that the scale of the problem of the backlogs is worrisome. My boss has signed on the letters stating as much, but it's also worrisome from the standpoint of, like, how do you really get at, solving the problem? We've done a site visit with NARA and, sat down and actually with the FOIA reviewer and looked at, the complex process they go through, and it is a paper-based process a lot of the time too. So these are big problems, but interested in reforms that are targeted and can move the needle. I would say though, kind of on an active basis, we work well with our counterparts in the Senate and our minority, and as we go about legislating, when there's a question of, where to set the presumption of openness, we always kind of go back to FOIA by reference and double down on that, because that's a rich law, and there are widely understood expectations when you rest things there, both for what should be disclosed, but also the protections that certain stakeholders need to see.
Thank you. Any last comments, or should we go to questions?
No, I want to thank folks for this and for having us. I do want to plug that our 5th National Action Plan self-assessment just came out yesterday for public comment. That'll be out for 60 days. Looking to collect all of the feedback and make updates as needed. Of course, we weren't involved in actually putting the 5th Action Plan together, but certainly collecting that feedback is valuable. And then to thank our representatives from civil society and the legislative branch for putting things together like this, because this is how we become more open.
Absolutely. And with that, does anyone in the audience have questions? I sure hope so, because I sped us along for you guys. Yeah. Let's go. 1, 2.
I'm Catherine Foxall. I work with the Society of Professional Journalists and others on the issue of the gag rules in the agencies and almost everywhere now that say no one can speak to the press without going through some kind of process. Often, on the face of it, that means you can't have any kind of confidential conversation, but often it means you're just not going to have any conversation. I saw this happen over a number of decades, and as a public health reporter, I have to tell you, we will get lots of information. I mean, there are so many avenues that the public, the reporters, whoever, just trying to drink from a fire hose. So don't worry about there being stories for the newspapers tomorrow. What you need to worry about is they're real ragged. The journalists don't always know this, but they're real ragged in what we understand. There is somebody sitting over in HHS or wherever, and maybe they have hardly any rank at all, but they're looking at this and say, boy, I don't understand. They just missed the whole point. And that person is specifically blocked from talking to a reporter. I don't know why we aren't all scared to death. We've lost 7 million people worldwide to COVID. Just one example. And all 70,000 people at HHS are blocked virtually. After about 13 years of working on this, I don't understand why we all aren't very frightened.
Thank you. Well, I would say press access, sounds like press access to government employees other than other than public affairs officials could be ripe for National Action Plan 6, and I'll let you guys comment as you like.
No, I think that Catherine's exactly right, that it's an ongoing battle. I think it's been slightly better sometimes and worse most of the time. But it's an ongoing struggle. It's not this administration, it's not just the last administration. It's agencies wanting to protect themselves, essentially, and not wanting, I think there are clear rules that exist on what people can talk about in terms of, they can't talk about areas outside their expertise. But I think there's a way to deal with this, but yeah, I think it's a real issue. And there are organizations that have good thoughts about this, and I'm sure we'll be happy to share them with you.
So just writing stuff down. Sure. Yeah, I think that's absolutely an area we could look at for the next National Action Plan. Obviously with support of not only civil society, but agencies understand how best to write a commitment around that, what the verbiage look like, and then those smart metrics that would come out of actually making sure we did the thing that we're talking about.
And I think to the extent that you can talk to people in the agency below the level of the leaders and the press officers, that hear the frustration that they feel.
Open government engagement at work.
There you go.
Alex, Christian, and then Alex, I just want to make sure.
I'd be remiss without noting that for, people who have noticed instances of waste, fraud, and abuse, the Oversight Committee can receive whistleblowers, other committees of jurisdiction, so please also consider that an option. And we'll meet you at your comfort level of, how you want to engage, in what form, and our goal is to get you connected to the appropriate expert that can really understand what you're trying to voice and assess that. But also, come with information, write it out, and just speak, but speak clearly and slowly, and there's no rush. We'll meet you on your terms.
Thank you. Alex.
So, quick, just point of fact. The U.S. has been found to have acted contrary to process by OGP 3 times. For some inscrutable reason, OGP decided that was okay and didn't keep us under review. The rest of the world has looked at our process and seen that the US can get away with open washing, with participation washing. I was part of the last 4 cycles. I experienced officials coming and saying, here's the president's management agenda, you can choose from this. I experienced last cycle, we had officials say, we're gonna do this right, and in May of 2022, they put up forms, and I did not hear from them again until October. It's not really dressed in that self-assessment. And I know you're not accountable for what happened before, but I noticed that none of the people who did that are here. None of the white people from the White House is here. The big question I might ask that I think has actually been answered is, can this succeed in the United States without the White House leading? I would say that it is actually impossible, if not moderate and say implausible. Other countries where this is successful have their legislative branch involved. We did not do that. The Obama administration at the beginning made several tactical and strategic failures. It is possible for Congress right now to submit its own plan. Didn't get the chance to ask the representatives if they'd do that because they had to leave, but that was not going to be my question for them. For a couple of years now, U.S. civil society has been looking for trust signals from our government to see if this is something we can trust in. This self-assessment is not, I'd say, entirely, I'd say it lacks candor, to use a criticism of the last Attorney General in the previous administration. It does not acknowledge that you all, as a government, presented to us a pre-baked plan. You mentioned FOIA. People in these virtual consultations, because we had no in-person roundtables, even though the administration was meeting with other people in the White House at the time. So there's nothing about FOIA in this. It's okay, we'll include it. And so then here's Bobby from OIP at the next session. He says, we're going to do business standards and we're going to do a self-assessment toolkit. We're going to do this wizard for FOIA.gov, which none of us asked for. It's actually doing something very interesting now because it's forcing them to see that their data isn't very good. They did not co-create commitments with us. The DOJ just kept doing what it was doing. We gave them a panoply of options to improve the FOIA. So the question is this doomed to fail unless the President and the White House get involved in it? Is it doomed to fail if Congress does not actually get involved with its own plans? Is it doomed to fail if it continues to be consigned to the opacity of obscurity? I'm very grateful that Congress is now having this conversation here, but it's a couple years late, if not a decade late, in terms of doing meaningful oversight. And I was talking with Darrell Issa about this in 2012. Nobody knows about it, and therefore there's no accountability for delivery. And what's missing from hearing this conversation is the press. There's no monthly press conference. There's no monthly town hall. There's no releases going out. I'd say to you, where is the GSA communication shop? You're speaking here today, nothing about it. The only release I've seen from the GSA is when the administrator went to Estonia last year. If this doesn't get improved, why should we expect there to be different outcomes? And why should people in civil society and the American people bother investing in this with any more legitimacy than, frankly, it deserves?
Thanks. So we'll end on that tough question. Is the open government partnership doomed?
Unless.
Not loaded.
Let me pass that. No, I would have to believe no, right? Like, I didn't get into public service to say that the participation in government is doomed in any way, shape, or form. I think we all do the best we can with what's in front of us and what we have. We want to build trust with civil society to continue, no matter what the outcome of the next election is, DR or I. It will certainly be one of the three. And we want to continue to do the good work of the American people, which includes a more transparent, accountable, and participatory government. So is it doomed to fail? I would say, God, I hope not.
Would you at least revise the commitments or add new ones? Because right now the plan ends at the end of this year, and then 2025 is the gap. Why not add new ones that are pursuant to what we've all asked for, or revise them, as IRM has said? The self-assessment says you're not going to do that.
No, so there's no plans in place right now to add or alter the 5th National Action Plan, and they'll be using that gap year to really ensure that the 6th National Action Plan is as robust and co-created as possible. Again, we want to look to the future to ensure that as we build forward, we build forward with everyone in the best co-creation process possible.
Trees?
No, I'm,
Lucky.
yeah, I'm lucky.
our panelists, thank the audience, thank the senators, thank Jeb and Cody that put this on, many thanks. And it is great to be rubbing shoulders with the legislative branch and the executive branch and talking about open government. It does not happen enough, and I'm very hopeful that more of this will happen in the future. So thank everyone.
Whatever you ever wanted to.
Oh, I agree with all.
Oh, you haven't looked through it.